we have a goal of 20% increase in deployment of renewable energies until 2030, and a goal of plus 27% energy efficiency, which shall be revised or reviewed in 2020, having in mind an even higher goal, 30% of energy savings. It is a difficult task to reach these goals, as we can already see in view of the 2020 targets. Renewable energies are, under the present market circumstances, not yet competitive in terms of pricing with fossil fuels. For energy saving, I think the situation is a bit different. Energy savings can make sense economically, but they require investments upfront and considerable investments under certain circumstances. Private and public investors might not be ready to take these kind of costs, expenditures. So it is clear that support, or let's say policy instruments, need to be administrated and designed in order for these goals to be reached, both on the national level, on the municipal level, but also, at least as far as framework requirements are concerned, on the European level. When designing such instruments, or when deciding about the right policy mix, because you can give financial incentives, you can regulate, you can combine the two instruments, certain very fundamental considerations must be taken into account. First of all, the instruments need to be fit for purpose. They must be designed so as to reach the goals. At the same time, they must provide for reaching the goals with the right speed. Now, energy efficiency, we are witnessing, is rather slowly getting where it's supposed to be getting. As for renewables, the situation is different within member states. In some member states, such as Germany, the speed is rather high, and that by itself can be a problem, for example, in terms of grids. Second, the costs must be taken into account. When you give support, the burden on budgets should be not excessive. And I'm not only talking about public budgets, talking about deficit criteria, but I'm also talking about private budgets. Energy needs to remain affordable. Otherwise, the EU energy and climate policy will lose its public acceptance. Then third, such policy instruments should not be an impediment to the internal market. The internal market is one of the major achievements of the European Union, and that means that in supporting renewables, in supporting energy efficiency, you should not raise barriers to the internal energy market, and there should not be more distortion to internal competition than is absolutely necessary. These rather fundamental principles show that it is not easy to design such schemes, and I'm very happy that today I have two experts that will be able to outline where the right balance could be. I would have loved to have three experts. However, the third one, Oliver Zator, could not come here because his plane from Paris was cancelled. So what we will do is we will divide this panel into two blocks. I'll start with renewable energies and Professor Dr. Mario Ragwitz from the Fraunhofer Institute for Systems and Innovation Research, which is a very well-known German research institute that serves as an advisor both for the German government and for the European Commission, inter alia. Professor Ragwitz is also a honorary professor at the Freiburg University for Energy and Climate Policy. He will be talking about support schemes for renewables.
Thank you very much, Savaka. Thanks for the organizers for inviting me to talk about the first side of the same medal, this metal characterized by capital intensity and low fuel and operation cost intensity. Renewable energies, energy efficiency is the second side of this metal, and both have to go together. I would like to start with a number of theses in my presentation, and then try to justify these theses during the presentation. First one, I would like to say that despite the strong cost reduction of renewable technologies in the last decades or 2 decades, support schemes and targets are still needed because we have a capital-intensive technology, and therefore risk mitigation is a key element for incentivizing these technologies. The focus of the further renewable development in Europe will shift from a further cost reduction to improving market integration and increasing the market value. And this also, like first glance, an idea for the title, what comes after feed-in tariffs. So we will probably see stronger need for market integration in the future. Demand-oriented renewable generation, demand-side flexibility, sector coupling, participation of renewables, and demand-side management and balancing markets will be key for this integration. Also, feed-in premiums can facilitate the market or demand-driven generation from renewable energy plants at minimum risk for investors. This is really key, and I will emphasize that throughout my presentation, that minimizing the investor risk has been the main advantage of the key successful policies like feed-in tariffs in the past, and that should be maintained to the degree or to as far as possible. Renewable energy support should continue to support should continue at moderately negative prices. This is one key element of a de-risking strategy. And when it comes to auctions, which are demanded by the European Commission in the stated guidelines, we can use them as in segments where they are suitable in order to incentivize competitive price setting, but auction design should maximize implementation rate and again minimize the risk for bidders. The structure of my presentation is I would like to first start with the reviewing the 2020 horizon, then have a look at the targets for the year 2030, and then come to the instrument or support scheme specific requirements from the stated guidelines, as there are auctions to determine the remuneration level, premium support schemes, in particularly no premium payment during negative prices, technology neutrality, and opening of national support schemes. And I'll give you my assessment on these elements. Starting with the targets for 2020, and here particularly focusing on the electricity sector, I've shown the historic trend of the various technologies in the electricity sector and the trend that was identified and projected by the national renewable energy action plans in Europe. We see that Europe currently is on track, is slightly overachieving, but not massively overachieving. As many complain or tend to complain that there is a sudden and unpredicted increase of renewables, and this brings major problems for the markets and the ETS. I think this figure shows that this is certainly not the case, but we had long-term targets for renewables, rightly so, until 2020, and we are currently on good track to achieve these targets, but there's still ambition ahead, and we have to continue our efforts to really reach these targets. Also, in terms of technologies, we see that for wind onshore, wind offshore, solid biomass, etc., we are quite on track. We are slightly overachieving as compared to the national renewable energy action plans with photovoltaics. Why is this? Because we have been talking about evolutions and revolutions this morning already. I think in case of photovoltaics, we have really seen a revolution. We have seen such a unprecedented and also slightly unpredicted price drop of these technologies, that renewable technologies, in particular photovoltaics, which used to be an expensive technology in the past, is no longer an expensive technology. Here shown in a double logarithmic plot, which is nice for mathematicians or physicists, but for normal people, the linear representation is more suitable. And here we see that really prices for modules have dropped just during the last 5-6 years from about $4 per watt peak to substantially less than $1 per watt peak for photovoltaic modules. At the same time, the global market increased to more than 200 gigawatt, and as currently the markets are exploding in China, Japan, India, the US, we will see a steep further increase of photovoltaics capacity on a global level. Europe is even lagging behind at the moment as compared to these global markets, and we will see further price drop due to the technology learning, due to the capacity increase and cumulatively increasing installed capacity. And therefore, I think one really main lesson learned from the past development on the track towards 2020, that as we were talking about expensive technologies and expensive renewable generation, this is less and less the case for the future, where renewable technologies are really becoming mainstream, and price and cost in competitiveness is less and less of an issue. How have we achieved these developments on a European level? It was mainly supported by national support schemes. Here in bluish color, you see all feed-in-tariff, feed-in-premium types of schemes, and in reddish color, the quota schemes and based on tradable green certificates, whereas the UK and Italy have no longer a quota obligation as their main support scheme, but a feed-in-premium type of scheme, which is called contract for difference in the UK. Is very, very similar to the feed-in-premium scheme in Germany, for example, in the Netherlands, and also in Italy now. The main representatives of quota schemes are still Poland, Romania, and Sweden, together with the Norwegian market. And these national support schemes have been very successful, and they have also been criticized in the past, sometimes for overcompensation or creating bubbles for renewable technologies. And for this, I show here the price and the cost development of photovoltaics as an example in Germany, to see or to show that these schemes also have been very dynamic and adaptive to the cost development, something that is sometimes not emphasized in the debate. We have seen that the cost of photovoltaics generation in Germany has decreased by a factor of 4 to 5 during the last 8 years, and the policy, the feed-in tariff, has followed. Sometimes it was a bit slow, as in 2009, 2010. These were the years with the huge photovoltaics rush in Germany, but on average during the period, it has quite nicely followed the path of cost reduction, and with this has incentivized substantial technology learning, innovation on a global scale, and therefore making renewable technologies almost competitive in the electricity market in particular. The debate within the period until 2020, until now, was for a long time between, on the one hand, feed-in tariffs, and on the other hand, technology-neutral quota models as they have been implemented in UK, for example, or in Italy, in Belgium at that time. And the advantages of feed-in tariffs were really widely acknowledged, and they are still existing, and therefore many countries on a global level still implement feed-in tariffs, as they give low investment risk and allow for high technology diversity, for low windfall profits for mature technologies, and a broad spectrum of investors, which brings new competitive elements into the energy markets at the first place. The disadvantages that are mentioned and that are present for just fixed feed-in tariffs is that the electricity price signal, the hourly dispatch signal, doesn't arrive at the renewable plant, and therefore the compatibility with hourly electricity markets is somewhat limited, and there are limited elements for competitive price setting because tariffs are typically set administratively in a feed-in tariff. Technology-neutral quota models had exactly the opposite in terms of advantages and disadvantages, in particular high risks and uncertainties and high windfall profits for mature technologies. That's the main reason why these systems have been, at the end, more expensive for the policymaker, for the consumer, for the society as a whole, and therefore have been revised in in the most important member states. And this absolutely black and white discussion has emerged during the last years into a more nuanced discussion. Feed-in tariffs have been revised in order to take up the criticism of low market compatibility with taking up feed-in premium elements, in particular the floating premium element, where risk for the investor is mitigated to a minimum by taking away long-term price risk like fuel prices or CO2 prices. And therefore, with these kind of floating premium design options, like the contract for difference in UK, the compatibility with the electricity markets is reached. However, still there might be the criticism that tariffs are still determined administratively and not by markets, and therefore there is the requirement for introducing auction schemes for renewable development, which is now done based on the state aid guidelines, and it's also done on an international scale in Brazil, in South Africa, etc. And first member states start to implement that. But I would like to emphasize that it is a development which is important for countries where renewables take a larger share, but care is needed because also auctions don't work in all situations, and there's little experience with these type of instruments for renewables to the current status. We are developing the targets further. It was already mentioned that the target of 20% in the final energy for 2020, which is translated to about 35% in the electricity sector, has been increased to at least 27%, as Director Ristori, Director General, rightly said, for 2030. And the question is, what is the level of this target for the different sectors, in particular for the electricity sector, and what is the legal bindingness of this target? The 2020 target was still mandatory binding on a member state level, and the 2030 target is currently only EU binding, and there's an intense debate how to break that down onto member state level and how to increase or have a substantial level of commitment also at the member state level for 2030. First of all, I would like to show the quantitative implications of this 27% target for the electricity sector. As I mentioned, the 20% target roughly means 35% in the electricity sector, whereas the 27% target towards 2030 brings about 46 to 50% for the electricity sector, depending on the level of ambition, for example, for liquid biofuels in the heating sector, or also depending on different assumptions on energy efficiency. So, as you see, the fact that renewable technologies became cheaper, etc., would have been an argument for even more ambitious targets than the 27%, but also these 27% have a reasonable degree of ambition, and they will not come by itself. In order to underline this message, I show here the net increase of renewable generation in the electricity sector during the period 2010 to 2020, as compared to the net increase during the next decade until 2030, and compare that to the gross increase, whereas the gross increase also considers plants, renewable plants that have been developed in the period towards 2010 and are now retiring and are at the end of their lifetime and have to be replaced. And taking this replacement effect into account and therefore looking at the gross increase, we see that during the period 2010-2020, we needed roughly an increase of about 500 terawatt hours of new renewable electricity. And depending on, as I said, biofuel targets and energy efficiency, the range of new renewable electricity towards 2030 during the decade 2020 to 2030 will be between 500 and 800 terawatt hours. So we see actually in terms of gross increase, the ambition level is increasing, and therefore this strongly calls for the need for national ambition, national commitment and national policy also after 2020. And this holds for the majority of member states. And therefore, it is important to talk about support schemes, about incentive schemes, because we will not only need them until 2020, but also beyond that. And until 2020, the European Commission, DG Competition, has implemented the state aid guidelines, which calls for these four main elements: auctions to determine the remuneration level, as I have mentioned, the premium element of support, the technology neutrality, and opening up of national support schemes. First, again, I would like to underline the message that some support will be needed until 2030. We see here the technology costs of the main renewable technologies: wind onshore, wind offshore, photovoltaics, utility scale and small scale. And we see, on the one hand, these technologies become competitive or cheaper until 2025. The different bars here show the year 2014 and 2025. And you see wind onshore and utility scale photovoltaics, as well as some biomass technologies, hydropower, will be substantially cheaper, will be very cost competitive, but still we need to support, in order to fulfill the long-term climate mitigation objectives, a broader portfolio of renewable technologies. It will also involve wind offshore in some countries. It will involve geothermal energy in some countries. And therefore, the cost reduction will be substantial, but there will be still a gap between the reference market price and the average level of remuneration for new renewable investments. And additionally, depending on the way we have flexibility of our electricity markets, and we come to a more flexible market design, we will have market values of renewables which are lower than the average market or the average reference price at the electricity market. This is the so-called merit order effect. And due to the fact that the market value for renewables will be lower than average, there will be a gap also beyond 2020. This will not be the same for every member state and every technology, but on average there will be a gap, and this calls for the need of support. But how to actually determine this level of support is the big debate. In the past, we had mainly, in particular in feed-in-tariff countries, support determination based on administrative tariff setting, and this involved the risk of excessive or insufficient support if the real costs of renewables were not known sufficiently well to regulators, national governments. And therefore, the Commission calls for auctioning, tender systems, and this is the main reason here is to have competitive elements for price setting, and in some countries also some sort of volume control in order to increase the planning possibilities for the overall electricity sector. And the use of auctions are common in the electricity sector, but they are not as common for the renewable technologies. First countries on the global scale are implementing them, and there are many good and positive, but also negative lessons learned from that. And some of those I've listed on the next slide. In some countries, we have seen very unrealistic, either low or very high bids, and in particular, in case of low bids, like we have seen in Brazil, there was this situation of underbidding, and therefore the fact that strategic behavior led to substantially lower prices than the long-term costs of the technology, and therefore to what led some renewable generators into a difficult economic situation, and therefore the auctions have to be designed in a way that ensures realistic bids. And it should also avoid high prices due to collusive behavior, so one should have a certain market diversity of actors in order to implement successful auctioning. Secondly, one should ensure high implementation rates and the timely implementation of projects. In many countries, there were no penalties implemented together with auctions, and then they received low prices, but also very low implementation rates. So substantial and realistic penalty rates are an important success criterion for auctions. One should ensure the continuity of support, so not involving any stop-and-go cycles with the introduction of auction. And last but not least, one should limit the risk for investors, as high risk for investors would penalize a stable development of renewables. And this has also been seen in some countries implementing with auctions. The last element, or the second element of the renewable state aid guidelines, or state aid guidelines for energy and environment, is the further market integration or integration of renewables with the electricity markets. The Commission, in their communication on market design, asks for adapting the market design for renewables properly and to adapt support schemes to the markets. The question is arising from that requirement, which is now currently discussed within the Commission, is what is the function of the right market signal with respect to renewable support. And the Commission says a functioning market with appropriately defined price zones would signal where and when electricity should be generated from renewable energy sources. Where this determines mainly the investment decision. And the investment decision should be based on low generation costs by the renewable energy portfolio, but also by high market values, so where there is scarcity in the electricity market. And this asks for a balanced spatial and also technological renewable distribution, and therefore only least cost concentrating on one region and one technology will probably not maximize the market value. And the investment decision not only depends on economic criteria, but also on non-economic criteria like public acceptance, and therefore a properly designed support scheme and market should avoid hotspots and installation of all renewables in one specific regions. When renewables are produced is or concerns the dispatch decision. So therefore, the dispatch decision should allow for renewable generation as long as market prices are higher than the negative value of the green good of renewables. In the green certificate market, the value of the green good would be the certificate price. In a premium system, it's roughly the premium level. As long as the electricity price is higher than this negative value, there's still a macroeconomic benefit from producing additional renewables in an electricity system. And further on, the question is how or this dispatch signal not only depends on the renewable support and renewable control, but also on the overall energy system. And here I show as an example the residual load curve for the electricity market in Germany in the year 2020, where the residual load, so the total load minus the renewable generation, is shown for every hour of the year. And you see that we have high residual loads, so still need for conventional capacity in a few hours of the year with 70 gigawatt, but we have many more hours where renewable capacity or renewable generation will be as high as such that we have negative prices in the electricity market and some, let's say, oversupply in the electricity market. And this oversupply will in particularly be relevant if there's a high must-run capacity of conventional generation in the electricity market, and therefore the key element for an efficient dispatch decision of renewable capacity is the reduction of this must-run capacity and therefore increasing the flexibility of the conventional electricity system. And only in a few hours there will be oversupply by renewables such that curtailment will be necessary, but the first element is to increase the flexibility of the overall electricity system, and this also asks for higher price spreads at the electricity market in order to incentivize actually investments into flexibility options. But on the, I'm asked to talk about renewable support scheme and the question how we actually can increase flexibility from the point of view of instruments for renewable energy support. And here, as I've already mentioned, so-called premium support schemes or premium options are the main answer. On the left-hand side, you see the functioning of a fixed feed-in tariff system in an electricity market where the remuneration is fixed and independent on the electricity market price. There will be one fixed level of remuneration. In a premium design option, the sum of the electricity market price, shown here in yellow color, and the premium will determine the remuneration level, whereas on the right-hand side of the premium design options, in a fixed premium system, there will be always, in every hour of the year, a fixed level of the premium payment on top of the electricity price, which involves major risk elements for the renewable investor, because due to scarcity in the electricity markets, increasing CO2 prices, fuel prices, etc., the remuneration could substantially increase or decrease in the future. And therefore, the investment decision will be subject to substantial risk premium. Therefore, this fixed premium, which was introduced in about 2006 in Spain, was replaced by a so-called cap and floor system, where the risk of overcompensation and undercompensation has been limited. And the further development of this cap and floor is the so-called sliding feed-in premium or contract for difference, which is now the dominating instrument in the European member states, where the average of the sum of the electricity market price and the premium level on a monthly level or annual level will remain constant or will attain the level of the feed-in tariff, of the fixed feed-in tariff. And therefore, this system combines both advantages of feed-in tariffs and feed-in premium. It has a similar investment certainty as a fixed feed-in premium, fixed feed-in tariff, but allows for market integration and for an hourly reaction of renewable generators on hourly electricity prices. And therefore, this type of sliding feed-in premium contract for difference is currently the dominating instrument when it comes to market integration based on limiting market price risk for renewable generators in the European markets. And last but not least, show here the comparison of implementation of this system in major European member states like Germany, Denmark, Finland, Italy, Netherlands, UK. And you see there is some convergence. So all of these member states have implemented that type of sliding feed-in premium, floating, so there are different names around for that. The adjustment of the reference price is slightly different, whereas this is monthly in Germany, it's annually in Netherlands, and other implementation details in other member states. So there's still an intense debate on convergence of these different design elements. Also, not in all member states, the profile factor, so the technology-specific market value of wind, PV, etc., is taken into account as an explicit element for this premium calculation. So, for example, in Netherlands and Germany, this profile factor, this technology-specific market value is taken into account, and in other member states not. think in order to minimize risk, it would be good to take it into account. And also the question is whether a management premium is introduced that explicitly remunerates for extra responsibilities in a premium option like balancing responsibility, etc. This is taken into account in some countries like Denmark, Netherlands and Germany, but not in others. So you see there are many design elements of premium system which are still under discussion, and where I hope that from a new Renewable Energy Directive to 2030, there will be more guidance by the Commission in order to have convergence and to really agree on best practice implementation details. And I think this is also currently under discussion. But this is also one of the advantages of Europe, that member states can experiment with different options and try to converge to best practice implementation. Summarizing on the question, what comes after feed-in tariffs, I would like to again close with a number of statements. First, I would like to say that in order to facilitate policy and industrial learning, one should, at the first place, provide a stable support scheme for renewable technologies in order to develop the market, in order also to reduce financing costs, as we have learned that in capital-intensive technologies is not a very surprising message, but it needs to be repeated. Anyhow, the cost of capital and risk premium play most important role, and therefore minimizing investment risk is the key element. And therefore, I think it's a good side of the coin that member states have started with long-term PPAs in terms of fixed feed-in tariffs in order to reduce investment uncertainty. But as soon as renewables become the main players in the market, which there will be in 2030, there needs to be also some stronger type of market integration. Prices should not be set by governments only, but somehow react to cost development. And therefore, in particular for member states with less experience, I think there should be a blueprint of successful and best practice implementation of new policy design. This is one element for small-scale technologies or technologies where auctions don't work. Methodology for strike price, tariff setting, feed-in tariff setting based on an administrative level should be harmonized in Europe. There should be also a harmonization of implementation of auction design procedures, design element, and of premium design elements in order to facilitate the market integration and also in order to facilitate convergence of policy among European member states. I think such a blueprint is particularly important for this region here, where sometimes in energy ministries only very few people are responsible for the renewable support, and running an auction and developing an efficient auction is really a cumbersome and it's a difficult task, and therefore these type of blueprint elements could be very important. One should provide all necessary regulations to support the participation of renewables in demand-side management in system services markets. I think this is really key in order to maximize the market value of renewables. I think I've made clear that not cost development is maybe the strongest or the major element to be developed and achieved in the next decade, but really also increasing the market value of renewables. And in order to increase the market value, we have to increase the flexibility of the markets and therefore increase the participation of demand-side management and renewables in these type of short-term markets. And last but not least, I would like to say a word on the other two elements that were asked by the state aid guidelines, in particular technology neutrality and opening of support schemes. I don't think it's the right time to ask for technology neutrality yet. First, because the long-term power system optimization may require and will require, this we know from all modeling, a diversity of the supply portfolio, of the renewable supply portfolio. We'll need different renewable technologies, and only letting the market decide on the cheapest current option will not reflect this diversity which is needed in the long term. And technology costs also still currently significantly, and therefore this will involve the risk of over subsidizing low-cost options and therefore increasing the overall policies for supporting the renewable energy portfolio. And maybe last but not least, also the element of integrating grid planning and generation asset planning asks for some technology specification in order to have a more targeted planning of the overall transmission grid. And last conclusion, I would like to emphasize that I would ask to be cautious with a very fast and wide, far-reaching opening of national support schemes in order to allow the coordinated planning, again, of grid assets and generation assets, as well as to emphasize or to maintain the public acceptance of renewable development. I mentioned not only economic criteria are important for the investment decision and for a stable market of renewables, but also non-economic elements like social acceptance. And therefore, national support schemes guide this type of diversified supply and investment decisions of renewable technologies. And therefore, a very far-reaching opening and quick opening of national support scheme might undermine these requirements. And I know that this was a lot of information, and the time, even though I took a bit more than I actually had, was too short to cover all the topics. And therefore, I would like to hint you on a more thorough presentation of these elements. It will be in May, from 9 to 11th of May, at the Florence School of Regulation. Alberto Potocnik, Director of ACER, Leonardo Meos, and further speakers from Iberdrola and Enel will be present. And the overall regulation and integration of renewable energy into the electricity market in Europe will be the main focus of this event or of this week of lectures. And so every issue that still might have remained open can be touched upon that in this longer workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much for this very detailed and comprehensive analysis. As you rightly pointed out, I think the more you talk about this subject, the more issues arise to be discussed. And I would like to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions, even though we are a bit short in time. Is there anybody who would like to ask a question? I have a couple, but I think I will postpone that. Oh, there is one.
Hello, my name is Gabriela Crețu. I'm from Energy Community Secretariat dealing with Renewable. Thank you very much, Mario, for this very useful presentation that you delivered to the audience today. Just one comment. We are also in the process of adapting our support scheme in the contracting parties towards more market integration and following the requirements of the stated guidelines. So I hope that the lawyers who are present today in the audience are taking good notice of what is at stake for the upcoming period in the contracting parties. I want firstly to touch upon this issue with your recommendation with somehow avoid at this point in time this technical neutrality, which is highly debated because the technical neutrality was introduced just to ensure a cost effectiveness development and lower the impact to end user consumer price. Maybe in the first stage it would be good to ensure technical neutrality to drop the prices and the impact to end consumer, and maybe to think on longer term on the benefit of and benefiting of the reduced cost of technology over time.
Thank you very much for this question. There are two main reasons. First, the first argument is policy costs. Imagine, for example, in Central or Northern Europe, you have essentially technologies which are mature. This is utility scale PV and utility scale wind onshore. And there are other technologies which probably also belong to the long-term portfolio, like wind offshore. And so you, if you ask for technology neutrality, you would just continue supporting the currently mature technologies at a portfolio of, let's say, 6-7 euro cents per kilowatt hour, and wind offshore is currently still twice as expensive. If you want to have wind offshore in the portfolio in a technology neutral setting, then you would heavily over-subsidize the mature technologies, which probably cannot be the answer. So the asking for technology maturity would really concentrate only on, in many countries, on onshore wind and utility scale PV, for example. So in a sense, it would reduce the incentive for developing further the innovation or the technology portfolio. This is one element which may be even justifiable, saying that the potentials of low-cost biomass and onshore wind and PV are sufficient. But secondly, and I think more important, is that technology neutrality and looking for the least cost solution from a purely generation-based approach is a too limited picture, because there are many elements of the energy system which are not internalized in the competition for the lowest price at the generation side. So in particular, infrastructure development, you need a completely different grid development and also system integration elements like balancing power, etc., which are not internalized in this least cost solution then. And so you might go for a least cost solution from a renewable support perspective based on technology neutrality, which might not be a least cost solution for the overall energy system. And therefore, I think there are good arguments that governments and regulators set a certain technology path of a technology portfolio they want to see in the long term. First for system integration elements, but also for innovation elements of technologies they want to have in a long-term portfolio. And therefore, going for complete technology neutrality at the current stage, I'm a bit skeptical. Maybe one could form different baskets of similar technologies which come at similar costs and have similar requirements also in terms of infrastructure and system market integration requirements.
Thank you. I'm afraid I would have to refer further questions. One more? A short one? No. Further questions to the coffee break, because otherwise we will not be able to listen to Kristóf Ferenczi, who is a lawyer at the international law firm Kinstellar, operating basically or focusing its operations in Eastern and Central Europe, Turkey and Asia. Kristóf is firm-wide head of the energy operations. He's also an arbitrator at the Hungarian Permanent Arbitration Court for Energy. And he will be talking about how to save energy.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. I will try to be the one who tries to wake you up for further questions. The topic that I will present on today is on energy efficiency, and from certain perspective, how efficient the energy regulatory framework today is, and how it could be for the longer term. For those of you who are not necessarily familiar with Kinstellar, we are an independent international law firm operating exclusively in Central and Southern Europe and Central Asia. So we have offices in Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania in the Central European area, and then and you'll see from the map that we've got energy community member states such as Serbia, Ukraine, and we also have operations in Turkey, Bulgaria, and Kazakhstan. So it gives us quite a bit of overview of different angles on energy policy and energy regulatory issues. And the energy sector has always been an important focus area for our firm. The main topics I want to cover today are energy efficiency within the context of the current EU energy policy, and then turning to the promotion of energy efficiency measures by way of market-based instruments and initiatives, as well as some aspects of state interventions in the energy efficiency field. And we'll try to draw conclusions partly based on our practical experience across these countries that we've seen in recent times. In terms of energy efficiency within the context of the energy union and current energy policy, most of you will be aware of the various directives and regulations in this field. My presentation will focus primarily on the energy efficiency directive itself, and will not speak more on, for example, the EPBD, energy performance of buildings directives, and some of the other regulatory instruments that are relevant in this field. Now, energy efficiency within the Energy Union initiative is clearly one where the European Commission is trying to give a new momentum, a new impetus to this area. Whilst it has been a policy objective for quite some time, it was the Energy Union communication or paper which put forward the idea of fundamentally rethinking the role of energy efficiency and treating as energy source in its own right. And the perspective that the Energy Union paper suggests, I think, is quite relevant, making it a primary consideration for member state energy policy making, and to design a market structure where energy efficiency measures could compete on equal terms with power plant capacities. A very interesting thought. And as we know, the three main focus areas for energy efficiency measures are building stock, transport, and heating and cooling, with some further areas, of course. What I would really like to emphasize, and I think whilst there were a couple of occasions to mention, but I think it's also a very important focus area, is that within the framework of the Energy Union initiative, the European Commission is trying to put forward a kind of a refocused energy R&I priority setup, within which one of the key priority areas, according to the Commission's intentions at least, would be developing efficient energy systems and energy neutral buildings. And then there are various initiatives on the financing side within the framework of the European Energy Union, including the smart financing for smart buildings initiatives. There's been a lot of talk today and also yesterday about the various targets. What I would like to point out is maybe the interplay between energy efficiency targets and those of, for example, the renewable energy targets, and also highlight the fact that since the launch of the Energy Union initiative, there were two important milestones, I would describe it like that, of the review process that is ongoing in relation to energy efficiency regulation or the directive itself. In November last year, the review pointed out that we are not exactly yet there where we may want it to be in terms of the 2020 targets, although we are on track, and this was also complemented with certain statements about the fact that the actual implementation deadline for the energy efficiency directive was not successfully met in many countries. It's one of the areas where the European Commission has launched quite a number of procedures against the member states, with the result that now we basically have a more or less implemented EED national legislation in most countries. And the November review pointed out that areas where further progress is necessary are quite, I would say, deep, because the Commission says that member states must take additional new measures to achieve their national targets, and also set more ambitious national targets to achieve the European level targets. And one very interesting point that clearly from the perspective of the region where I'm coming from is quite obvious, and that is that there are huge differences between, I would say, the more developed member states and the less developed member states in terms of energy intensity, especially in industry. And these are probably the one area which is extremely difficult to overcome for all kinds of economic reasons. The review went on with further public consultation, and I wanted to share with you some of the results of this consultation, which was concluded this year. Because these are the points that will come back when I speak to you about some of the practical experiences we have had with energy efficiency projects and stakeholders. Within the framework of this consultation, the interested parties expressed that they find the current energy efficiency framework extremely complex, which even for member state entities would require additional guidance from the Commission side. There were indications that the energy savings calculations should be based not on projections, but rather on actually observed data. One important point that was also made, which of course is not extremely surprising, at least from a legal perspective, that if member states' progress is not satisfactory, then the Commission should actually take actions and potentially sanction non-compliance. Further barriers that were identified by participants included a perspective on the time frame of the rules, because as you will see or you will hear from me, market-based energy efficiency measures are longer term. And if you have a framework which stops in 5 years' time or 4 years' time, then it's very difficult to implement actual projects. And there are various occasions of very high administrative burdens on the market players. And one area where there's a lot of debate and there's a lot of controversy is, for example, the verification of energy savings. Because it's even within the framework of private projects, it's very highly debated. But also there are indications that, for example, the rules for the accounting of energy efficiency investments are not exactly the right ones, and that public authorities in particular should take a longer-term perspective and rather base their public procurement decisions on life cycle cost analysis as opposed to some of the current approaches that they are taking. Now, within the framework of the Energy Union, there is the ongoing process of the review of both directives, so the Energy Efficiency Directive and the Energy Performance of Building directives. It's an ongoing process. These are just indications of some of the areas that have already been highlighted by this review process. But to my understanding, it has not yet been completed, so we'll have to see what the ultimate conclusions will be of that review. Now, turning to how energy efficiency measures are in fact implemented in practice or in real life. If someone looks at the 2014 energy efficiency communication of the Commission, already there very important indications you can find about the fact that actual projects need to be promoted more. So the market for energy services as defined in the rules should be supported more. And there is a clear need, according to the Commission, to demonstrate the business case for such projects and measures. And I really think, based on experience, that this is still the case. So on that basis, if we look at the landscape for energy efficiency market-based projects and measures, and here there's just a few definitions about some of the terms that are being used. If we look at, for example, energy performance contracting projects, EPCs are not to be mistaken with power plant engineering and procurement construction contracts. The essence of it is that ESCO companies, energy services companies, would implement such projects with the underlying idea of repaying investments for the purposes of energy efficiency increase or for enhanced energy savings directly from the saved energy costs. That's the main idea of such projects. In other words, in order to have municipalities, industrial players, even shopping malls, but also, of course, the likes of hospitals and schools, in order to have their aging and inefficient energy assets upgraded. The idea is that it would take place on the basis of saved energy costs that the project would achieve. And therefore, there are certain common characteristics of these type of projects that we see across our jurisdictions. You have a turnkey services setup, which already brings in complexity to the project structure, where the ESCO company is the one that gives the guarantee on energy savings to the ultimate client, whether it's a municipality or a school, etc. And the ESCO company would receive, in most cases, some sort of a management fee or a success fee out of the energy savings directly. But it also means that if over the lifetime of the contract no such savings are achieved, then in fact the energy savings shortfalls would need to be compensated for or repaid by the ESCO company. Now, just on the basis of these elements, you can imagine that the project contractual framework is very complex in most cases. It is focused around, of course, risk allocation, whereby performance risks, technical risks, regulatory risks are normally pushed onto the ESCO company itself so that the client would really reap the benefits of the structure. But it does entail long-term cooperation, so these are not 1 or 2 year contracts, but rather longer term. And there are different types of financing models around such structures. And that again brings, of course, complexity, because if, and that's most of the cases that we've seen, it's not the client, it's not the municipality, or it's not the school that brings the financing, but it's either the ESCO company and or the project financing entities that would bring the financial resources. But especially if the banks are involved, then you will see that their interests are clearly ones that, if you want to really address those, it again makes the structure slightly complex. Now, in terms of dealing with this type of complexities, you need to be aware of the fact that these contracts that we're speaking about are not really regulated contracts. These are not typical agreements that you would find in civil courts. But one area that I would like to draw attention to is that the Energy Efficiency Directive does have certain mandatory requirements for such contractual structures. And interestingly, out of the, I think, 12 mandatory elements, six mandatory items are focused on transparency and clarity of structure. And there is a reason why that is so. What we have seen across our offices when we were dealing with ESCO projects were a couple of significant lessons. First of all, I have not come across very successful contractual frameworks, especially because in most cases experienced advisors and market players were brought in at the time when the bank financing was brought into the play. And by that time, the client and the ESCO company have reached their commercial agreements on many points. Now, that's a difficult approach to structuring a project, especially if the commercial agreements are made without detailed regard to the local regulations. So, and local regulations in these type of projects may not necessarily involve, parliamentary acts. Sometimes it's really detailed municipality rules, etc., that would need to be taken into account. So details really do matter in these projects. Yes, of course, speaking as a legal consultant, I can say that we have been really confronted with situations where there was a misconception about why these structures are needed to be well done. So some of the real problems that we've seen, the measurement and verification of energy savings have often been left in vague terms in these structures, because what we've been told is, well, both sides, the client and the ESCO company, understand what energy saving is. But when you really are trying to put in an efficient energy saving scheme, it does matter in detail how you define this. regulatory changes are very risky areas for these projects, because if, for example, regulated tariffs change substantially or regulated tariffs are introduced, this can completely change the economics of the project, of course. And again, this may be an area which is not really dealt in detail in the contracts. And the financing of public bodies is a very interesting area, because what we have also experienced when dealing with similar projects with public entities was that they lost appetite, because they realized that due to certain governments having an understanding that, well, there are savings being produced, the benefit of the saving was immediately drawn away from the actual public body and put into, for example, regional or state budgets, all that benefit. So therefore, they lost their own interest. And just one word about dispute resolution clauses, very highly debated in these projects. So our recommendations with respect to these type of projects is that you really have to raise, firstly, awareness of the benefits of these projects. But of course, at the same time, you have to remove some of the market barriers that really hinder the successful implementation of these projects. And there is a lot of work to be done in relation to information sharing and the training of the stakeholders. Most of the benefits that could be the result of these projects would be probably not at the government level, but at the lower levels or regional level, local levels, where really there isn't much of a know-how about these projects and their fairly detailed contractual structures. So you really have to do an effort, both on a European level, but especially on a domestic level, to publicize success stories, tell the actual stakeholders how successful projects can be implemented, and give them training and potentially elaborate model contractual frameworks. And if you ask me whether I'm saying this because we want to win new business, yes, of course, but not exactly just for that. But really, especially when dealing with public bodies and municipalities, etc., it would really help them if there were at least some sort of a model template for these kind of projects. Now, turning to another type of energy efficiency measure, there are various state interventions foreseen by the current EU regulatory framework. There are certain direct legal obligations under the Energy Efficiency Directive, and there are indirect legal obligations as well as certain stated aspects as well. Now, in terms of the direct legal obligations, I think many of you are aware of the obligations on the public sector to renovate a certain percentage of the total floor area of heated or cooled public buildings, which is one of the reasons why in Hungary most of the EU funds are being now spent on such public sector renovations. Whereas on the private sector, there are obligations and possibilities for setting up energy efficiency obligation schemes with the possibility of opting out. And the one area that I would like to focus on a little bit more today is one particular indirect legal obligation, which is the energy audit requirement. There are certain other ones that are on the slide. But the energy audit requirement sounds quite technical. It's something to be, get over with. Let's, just do it, and then, we can wait a couple of years for the update. But together with Linklaters, so with the colleagues of Christopher Brehm and his team, we've done effectively, Linklater has done a European-wide, and we've done a survey across the jurisdictions we cover of the energy audit requirements, and I will tell you in a sec the results of that. Because it's quite, I think, telling. But just one word about stated aspects. I think it's just important to be mindful of the fact that under the energy and environmental aid guidelines, energy efficiency is one area where the promotion of state aid is possible, is foreseen, subject to various conditions, but both investment and operation aid are foreseen by those guidelines, although on a notification basis. But for example, under the general block exemption regulation, they're up to project value of 10 million euro per project. Even without notification, such stated measures may be taken by the member states. So turning to energy audits, we were asked, and of course the colleagues at Linklaters were asked by quite a number of clients to advise them on the actual rules on energy audit. And I have to say that it was kind of a surprise to me, because I thought it's going to be something very technical for the clients to get through and just do it. But in reality, we ended up advising clients for weeks on trying to interpret the rules. And I have found that, in a way, it's slightly disappointing that there was such a divergence in terms of the national rules. And because I have to come to an end very shortly, maybe what I will just say is, we are, both Kristóf and myself, very happy to share with you the results of our survey. There are various important inconsistencies, and for actual clients, entities working in the energy sector and outside of it, it is difficult. So I think it's good to have directives with national implementation, but those should be harmonized. Takeaways, I think it's both lacks of the energy efficiency measures that should be promoted more. In terms of the market-based mechanisms, and that's my key message for today, there should be much more of those projects. They could be very successful, but there is much more work to be done in order to have those projects. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kristóf. I'm extremely sorry that we needed to abbreviate it that strongly, in particular since market-based approaches, of course, are the best if they can work. But Dr. Fouquet, a lawyer at Becker, Büttner and Held, will have to leave in, well, more or less immediately, and she had promised to talk about arbitration under the Energy Union Charter. So I would very much like to give her the opportunity to make her speech now before the coffee break, so everybody can listen to her before she has to leave. Would you mind coming up? It's a bit spontaneous, but I think it's better than not having you here at all this afternoon.
Yeah. Thank you. Escape. I'm sorry for that, but I had said to the organizers that I have the chance there is even a direct flight still to Brussels, and I really need to catch that, and boarding is soon.
Slides was here, or will we?
It was in the next panel.
So, 3.
I don't know. It's then panel 4, probably. Yeah, we had sent it before. No, we had sent it before. Yeah, I start. I mean, I'm sorry for this, a little bit impromptu again, but the next panel will be on various issues on arbitration, and I think my colleague should come up and already introduce. But we will be listening, or you will be listening to the colleagues later. I don't know where the panel power presentations are, but nonetheless, I just start. I have my own copy. I'm sorry about that. I would focus today on the arbitration questions around the Energy Charter Treaty, a treaty which is, for many of you, well known as the classic, let's say, oil and gas dispute treaty, and on pipelines and those issues. But it had a new breath of life with unfortunate developments in several member states when it comes to renewable energy. And therefore, we will look into several issues around the treaty now. And Anne-Marie, you may have found it, or okay. So, yeah, it's not a problem. I have my copy, but. So we had in the last, let's say, from 2009-10 on, during the financing crisis, we had several member states who had often retroactively lowered their conditions for already, for example, running and invested projects in renewable, in the renewable field. And so I go all through that. And that led to anger and frustration and loss of money and value of companies who had invested in those countries, such as, to name a few, Spain, Czech Republic, Italy, Bulgaria. And then most of these countries or these investors looked at the Energy Charter Treaty, which foresees an international arbitration possibility and the claim for damage if your confidence, let's say, to make it very short, has been disappointed and your investment has suffered. Here you can see the number of investment dispute cases under the Energy Charter Treaty issued by or published by the Secretariat. And you see after 2010-11 a steep increase in cases. And we do have several cases. So for example, for Spain, I think even my number is not correct. There are now 20 investor-state arbitration cases registered at the Energy Charter Treaty Secretariat. And they were, and on the same time, we do have a discussion, and that will be the point of another intervention this afternoon, that people are hesitant about this tribunal way of investment treaty before these, let's say, private judges, so to say. And we see that a lot in many of our countries in the European Union concerning the treaty negotiations with North America. What is now interesting is, and it is not just somebody, but you see here who is, for example, we have just picked some of the cases like Landesbank Baden-Württemberg against Spain, a case which was only registered end of last year, and several others. When it comes to the cases, oh no, there I was too fast. There's a very interesting first judgment, let's say, from one of the tribunals, and that is interesting, and therefore I will stick to that a little bit as main part of my intervention, my short intervention, because there is a funny situation which occurred. We do have in the Union this Energy Charter Treaty where all member states of the Union are signatories to, and the European Union as such, represented by the Commission also. On the other hand, we have almost 200 individual investment treaties between European member states, coming mostly from the time when like 15 were not yet members. But these treaties are still there. They are phased out sometimes, but they are still there. I concentrate now on this Energy Charter Treaty alone. And this was the first judgment or award, as is the right term, from January of this year, and it has two sides of it. From the point of view of renewable investor, it was a disappointing decision because it would not give the right for damage, but it has also eluded and argued on a very strange dispute, in my view, we have at the moment within the Union. Because these investors were European investors in Spain. There's even a question mark if they were really outside investors, because behind this investment houses were Spanish persons, but that is now not to the Spanish company, as I say here. But the interesting thing is that the European Commission, since these renewable cases came up, is now speaking out loud and clear that a European investor has no right to attack another EU member state under the Energy Charter Treaty rules. And there were several, let's say, three three main arguments which were put forward in this case Spain, but mirroring the view of the European Commission. And the one was, Spain said the European Union, since the Union is signatory to the Energy Charter Treaty, the territory under the definition of the treaty is not the territory of the single state. So when you are not in that territory, but the whole European Union. So when you are living, so to say, or active in this overall territory, you could not attack, in this case, Spain under the Energy Charter Treaty because the Union has signed the treaty as well. That was something very interesting. This tribunal said no to that view because they said the member states remain parties to the convention, to the Energy Charter Treaty Convention. So that was the point which was then clarified, and the tribunal said that is not applicable as an argument not to have a right to use the treaty provisions. And then the Commission would also say, and Spain took this up as well, and I suppose in all cases, that, let's say, implicit, since the Commission signed for the Union, there would be an implicit disconnection clause in the treaty. The treaty has not such a clause, which could say we have such clauses in other international treaties where more or less, if I make it short, when the Commission comes in for Europe, the others go out. We don't have it in the Energy Charter Treaty, so the Commission created this implicit phase out, so to say. And that also was denied by this tribunal. And then the most pertinent argument of the Commission at the moment, or what they use very strongly, is that our treaty has, since Lisbon, has this article now, Article 344 of our treaty, the TFEU. Under that, member states cannot submit a dispute concerning the interpretation of the application of the EU treaties to any method of settlement outside the instruments of the treaties. But this is an article which goes member state against member state. And therefore, the Commission is of the opinion that it is also in an investor dispute. And there again, the tribunal said no. The tribunal went so far to say if only EU institutions can judge about applicability of EU law, then why can the national courts do it? So there was a little bit of a tit for tat, I would say. And therefore, the tribunal did not, so no violation, also not that they would say that since the trade law is now under our treaty the sole responsibility of the Union, that would mean that we cannot apply the Energy Charter Treaty. So that is a very interesting thing. On the content, I will not stretch so much if the tribunal was right to say that this specific situation in the past in Spain was evaluated correctly. I would only say I was astonished that they did not look into the retroactivity of the measure, but there were later cuts in the Spanish system which were even more difficult, and they are often now the objective of the running cases. So therefore, I put there's still hope. There's another case, just briefly, which also shows a weak point of the Commission. That's the Vattenfall case. After Fukushima, the German government had ordered the immediate shutdown in a moratorium of most of the German nuclear power stations, and that was then later structured in a renewed, let's say, and amended phase-out law. And Vattenfall is, as E.ON and RWE, claiming damage of interest before the German Constitutional Court. EnBW, the other nuclear provider, doesn't do it because it cannot do it. It's a public company. And Vattenfall also went to the European Court of Arbitration. And there's a case running, as I put here. The interesting thing is, it's the second time Vattenfall is picking Germany. The first time was in 2009 already, where Vattenfall dragged Germany before the court, before the tribunal, on the grounds that Germany had tightened the emission standards for coal power plants in a northern German part, which affected directly the investment of Vattenfall for a new coal power plant in Hamburg. And in the tribunal award, there was then, it didn't come that far. Germany made an out-of-court settlement. The interesting thing is, at that time, the European Commission did not take the role it is now constantly taking, and that is the so-called amicus curiae position. By that, she is now going into each of these cases and saying, you have no right to do this, to make it now very, for the sake of time. In the coal case with Vattenfall, they never did that. So in a way, you could say, or you did it always, or you cannot say now, or now I'm with the renewables, I'm amicus curiae, and I had put that to the Commission last year, and after tough discussion, they then only went also in the Vattenfall case, as not because of me, but they realized there is a mismatch. On the grounds, I think it's a little bit, and I agree, Lee, it's a bit an unnecessary conflict we have here, because normally all these tribunals look into the specific, in our case, European legislation before they come to an opinion. So they apply European law. And whenever they see there is a breach of the European legislation, they would not give normally the green light, let's say. And then there is another thing which makes it even more difficult, and maybe Lee can talk about that during discussion if you would take my place then, because she has a lot of cases also running. And that is that the Commission now, she just can't leave it. There's a Mikuli case, and you come to that. The Commission now is also of the opinion, since they say these tribunals are not cannot judge in intra-community disputes. She says when there is an award, then she says this is state aid. So if, for example, Bulgaria would be ordered to pay 10 million or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's always very costly, anyhow. But to pay, then the Commission would forbid the country to pay, because they would say this is illegal state aid. So here it becomes completely absurd, because the consequence of the arbitration is put in the convention, in the treaty itself. So these tribunals, they just say yes or no, but when they say yes, then the consequence of the treaty, which the Commission and the Union, all member states have signed, is to be applied. So that is very interesting. It's now before a court in New York on the specific Mikuli case, and the court so far doesn't seem to like the view of the European Commission. We could now look into if there's really the 5 criteria of state aid, but it's too long now. And I apologize again that I was gate crushing, and thank you, Ms. Haferkamp, for your patience.
It was worth it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dört. And just to wrap this up, I think we should have one final round of questions regarding energy efficiency, possibly again renewables, and as long as Dört is available, also the cases she cited. Anybody would like to start?
This question is for Dörte. Sorry, since you're leaving, I'm taking the opportunity. I hope you still catch your flight. My name is Thomas Palige. I'm working for Statkraft, Norwegian utility, state-owned. And the last case is clearly of interest for us, and we follow that proceedings in front of the Bundesverfassungsgericht. And the latest we heard is basically that now Bundesverfassungsgericht claims that Vattenfall has no basic rights because it's a state-owned company. And now what you said, clearly, I would like to hear, that leaves Vattenfall basically with no rights at all.
Yeah, no, Vattenfall can, also, I mean, what I said, I would say the Commission went too far.
Yeah.
So the Commission should be, they should be amicus curiae in these arbitration cases, but in helping that the European law is evaluated correctly on the case.
Yes.
And so I think, I see your point. They would be completely, now you could say, if the Commission could go that far, everybody, including Vattenfall, who is investing within the Union, is protectionless, especially with due respect, the Commission is screening the national justice system in some countries and is not so happy with Bulgaria and so yet. So there you have also an additional problem. But I agree with you. But on the other hand, look at NBW in Germany. They also cannot go to the Constitutional Court because they are a public company. That's the way the cookie crumbles.
Yeah. Thank you.
Aber jetzt gehe ich. After you have private toilets.
Goodbye, and thank you very much, Dörte. Questions concerning those gentlemen that have remained in the room? Yes, please.
Thank you. Although I could speak up. I'm Violeta Goganiceanu, the Energy Community Secretariat in Vienna. So I'm really interested in EPCs and the use of it or the practicality of using it. You mentioned that it's much easier when you have a model contract because it gives confidence to the public authorities, especially municipal authorities, to engage with a private investor or an ESCO company for that matter. I couldn't agree more. That's why in Serbia, for example, with a lot of technical assistance coming from a joint venture between the European Commission and EBRD, and with us in the tow, we prepared a model contract that was adopted through a rule book. And then we prepared a lot of projects for ESCOs to be tendered with a lot of documentation and everything else. Still, the confidence, funnily enough, the ESCO companies are more confident than the local municipalities, where in principle they got green light from their own government saying, well, this is a model contract, go ahead. There is a PPP commission that looks at it in principle. And even the PPP commission said, okay, lighting, street lighting, good, go ahead. Still, the municipalities have cold feet, of course. It's the first time ever. Therefore, probably even these classical EPCs for street lighting, in my view, you cannot get wrong with street lighting. This is the simplest possible type of municipal public services and improvements. But this is a story. Now, the question is, most probably, we shouldn't even engage in all these difficult negotiations and due diligence for small projects. A 200,000 euro project. It's not even worth going that way. Am I correct or not? What would be your sort of limit amount that you should have an EPC for? One, and how long would you recommend the time frame for that? Because this is also linked.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right that there is an issue with small-scale ESCO projects and the investment that would be required for implementing or putting work into coming up with model frameworks which are then not necessarily implemented. There are certain initiatives, as I understand, on the Commission side to try to promote the grouping of small-scale EPC or ESCO projects so that when grouped together, let's say 10 projects of 200,000 euros, it's already 2 million euros. It's kind of the limit. Well, of course, it's not strictly speaking a legal question, but 1 or 2 million euros is probably where interest starts to come into play more. So there is that possibility. Although I'm just based on experience in our countries, having 10 or 15 municipalities to sign up to the same type of program it nears the impossibility by definition. And just to give you, I mean, this just brings in mind an interesting story again from Hungary, where I come from. You can get wrong public lighting projects in some of the larger municipalities. In the evenings, it's really dangerous to go out because the public lighting new projects were so successful that there is no light by public lighting. So this is just to say about, you know, quality of service companies and documentation, etc., and sanctions. The other thing I wanted to mention in response to the background story you raised is that I think there's just so many initiatives on a European level, so many types of approaches being presented, and I think this is clearly an area where the European Commission, the European institutions could come up with at least kind of set of recommendations or rule books for at least for those countries where there is clearly a need for it, but there is no either appetite or not many success stories in this field. Because after all, I mean, I believe that the European Union itself is based on some sort of a common understanding of promoting competition and market-based solutions. So maybe that's an area to think about.
And in terms of length of reasonable length?
I think it starts in range of 6 to 8 years as minimum, but probably more in the direction of 8 to 10 years.
Thanks very much for both very interesting sessions. I have a question for both of you. On the renewable energy subsidies and the whole question of technological neutrality, what's maybe really interesting, we see the Commission maybe avoiding its own guidelines, which is not unusual, by exempting some projects under the research and development and innovation guidelines, which I don't think are applicable. I don't know if are they applicable as a key within the energy community area? I suppose they could be if you want. But you see a lot of offshore projects and sort of pre-market geothermal, that kind of area. And France is very good at using those guidelines. Okay. So I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, actually, I mean, there are a few exemptions to the state aid guidelines. The other one would be de minimis rules, where probably also quite a number of projects would go under the de minimis rules, which is like 6 whatever plants smaller than 6 megawatt, for example. With this, you can build quite some. I'm not sure whether the research innovation. Actually, I haven't dealt with that in detail. I'm not sure whether you can really build large-scale 100 megawatt wind farms.
No, they have to be experimental.
Yeah,
but
so
what's experimental is in the eyes of the beholder.
And in this sense, like if they are really experiment, then I don't think this is going to really change in quantitative magnitude the picture. Then really the majority of the projects would be still within the rules of the state aid guidelines. I think these de minimis rules are then quantitatively more relevant as having plants below 3 megawatt or 6 megawatt is very typical for wind plants, and so you could really build a major share of your total portfolio and flying somehow below the stated guidelines.
And my second question was on the energy efficiency, and you flagged up the need to provide efficiency service contracts in one of your early slides. And going back yesterday to the discussion on unbundling, it's probably not also that clear which part of an energy company should be doing that.
You seem to have the difficult questions. Yes, indeed. In terms of entities falling under unbundling, there are sometimes issues we've seen around the question as to how ESCO services would be provided, especially because you might see, for example, under ITO model that both the unbundled part and the parts for not falling under unbundling would require pretty much same services. What we've done in one particular case was discussing it in detail with the NRA and pushing the question to their backyard, and they have come up with an interpretation which they thought would comply with the ITO rules, and therefore the project with certain Chinese was finally implemented. But it wasn't a major 20 million euro project, so it was smaller.
I think I can take the opportunity to ask a question myself and make a comment myself. First, the question, you touched upon the issue of banks and banks coming in at a late state of negotiations, making matters very complicated. Our experience in Germany is that it's a better case if they do come in, because often they don't. What is your experience with, or do you share this experience, and do you think state guarantees could be a solution to promote the ESCO markets in the European Union?
I would separate the two parts of the question. The first part, I absolutely agree. So in our experience, in many of the projects where we came in at the stage when the financing bank, based on kind of project financing structures, was trying to come in, was that it was at that stage that the project parties realized that attention to detail was not necessarily complete, and leaving aside kind of structuring issues as to how the economics of the project would satisfy the financing bank's requirements in terms of return, etc. They had to realize that compliance with the law is an issue for the banks, and therefore it is in fact an issue for the project. And then the project had to be restructured, and in most cases it was successful. But clearly the banks bring in quite often the expertise to actually do the due diligence right on the project and enhance especially the client's understanding of how the project should work and what are the key requirements. So it's much better to have banks in the project than not have them. That's our experience as well. In terms of the second part, I'm not sure that state guarantees would really be the necessary. I'm still cautiously optimistic that if more education is being done, and if, especially on the client side, more promotion is done with real success stories as to how successful projects may be implemented, with potentially model contractor frameworks being at least shown that it's not impossible to put those into place, then we may actually get away without state guarantees, which again I just believe is one area where the European Union is supposed not to implement more than trying to work with market-based instruments. But in certain countries, we've seen governments flirting with the idea of putting in place such support or guarantee schemes, and sometimes it works actually.
Thank you very much. Then one comment regarding state aid rules, especially those on environment and energy. I think it rather often happens that the Commission starts off with very restrictive rules, trying to get everything into its remit, then later on in applying those rules, sees that they just don't fit the reality, and then they start to reinterpret them. I think that makes things very difficult. But I'm glad that now we have the guidelines until 2020. They will need to be reviewed, and with all the experience that we're gaining now, and I think you pointed out a couple of shortfalls which are very important in the present guidelines, the next ones might really fit the 2030 targets. If there are no more comments, then I would like to end on this happy note and invite you to join us for a coffee outside.